Oh yeah, I wanted to record.
Right now.
So, okay. Can I record straightforward? Yeah.
We are recording right now, Anthony.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the October 2018 edition of Consciousness Hour. Many of you will recall that I used to do another podcast many years ago called The Peake Experience, which I started, I think, around about 10 years ago, when I worked with two American friends, and we did a series of fascinating interviews. But one of the interviews we did was a particularly good one. All of them were good, I have to say, but this one was particularly interesting because I had the opportunity to interview somebody I have admired for so long, a guy called Andreas Mavromatis. And the reason I'd been in contact with Andreas, I'd read his book on hypnagogia many years ago, and quite by chance, I did a book launch, funnily enough, in central London at Watkins Books. And there was this Greek gentleman in the audience. And after I'd finished speaking, he came over and introduced himself. And it was Dr. Mavromatis himself. And it was probably one of the most amazing sensations of my life because he was one of my intellectual heroes coming along to listen to me talk. And not only that, but he had been slightly a man of mystery, in that he'd sort of dropped off the radar a little bit. For instance, there was a time when another mutual friend of mine, who's also been on this show, Gary Lackman, who used to be the lead guitarist of Blondie as Gary Valentine, Gary was also desperately trying to contact Andreas Mavromatis over his work on Hypnagogia. But he had failed to contact him. So I was in the wonderful opportunity of actually being in contact with this man of mystery and imagination. Now, again, it was interesting that in around about April 2012, Sirley Marques Bonham contacted me from Texas. And she is an experiencer plus a theoretical physicist herself. And she was trying to contact Andreas as well. And I managed to try and facilitate contact between the two of them. And Sirley then offered to send me her book, Self-Experiments with Consciousness and Hypnagogia. And I read through this book, and it blew me away. And it blew me away for many reasons. And I think it was because of the unique nature of the book. Her book works like an autobiography, which it is, and it's about her life, her growing up in Uberlandia in northern Brazil, near Brasilia, her experiences, but also how she wanted to be a scientist and her great need to be a scientist, but also her own experiences with lucid dreaming and hypnagogic imagery and other allied phenomena. Now, to me, this was a fascinating background because she is a recognized expert and did postdoctoral research into relativity. But also, she's also done a great deal of work in terms of neurology as well. So we have a very unique individual here. And I was delighted when Sirley agreed that she would become a guest on this show. And without further ado, Sirley, how are you today? How is everything with you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good. Right. Okay. What I would like to do is to give you the opportunity to fill in the details about the basic information I've just given to the watchers, readers, listeners, whatever we call the guys out there that regularly watch these shows. But if you could tell us a little bit about you and how you ended up being such a unique individual, I suppose.
I don't consider myself a unique individual. I'm a simple person, as I explained in my book. My families are farmers in the westmost part of Minas Gerais state. And then my parents migrated to Brazilian area, which is central Brazil, by the way, not northern.
All right.
There I grew up in a highly modern city because there was a design by modern, 50s, what they call mid-century modern type. And that reflected in everything, including my desire to start physics, something that my father kind of incentivized because of the Russian Sputnik experience. And that was kind of shocking that they were orbiting the Earth. But I went to physics, and that's the life. Some new people were just arriving from the United States, and there were new air in the area, so it was kind of exciting. The other part is, the tradition, the culture where I grew up with, means the ones on the farmers and the stories, the ghost stories and spiritists are highly common in Brazil. So, and my father curiosity and a little study of the esoteric part of, that's more European than anything else. Though the Americans, through Max Heindel, which what he contact with in São Paulo, brought a little more modern, but not so. If I read it now, I find it just like still a 19th century minded way to express. But anyway, that composed my interest, my curiosity has an incentive in that way from my father. The stories that I heard about and the influences, the environment, the spiritism, the work in Brazil was very popular. Also, it flavored the whole thing. I don't write very much about it, in my story, because I restricted that just to the first chapter. I didn't want to be a biographical thing completely, but writing how my interest, to be a scientist, but join it with this other interest, which is kind of spiritual, but at the same time nowadays is viewed more like a consciousness thing. Nowadays we don't talk about spirit very much, right? We talk about consciousness. It's more up to date, fashionable somehow. And but the bottom line, the mix that compose my personality comes from all this background. So that's why I introduced the esoteric part, the spiritism part from Brazil, because that's quite specific the way they deal there due to African influence, the religious influence brought to the Africans. And then my growing up, being a young lady who then goes to graduate school in São Paulo. And interesting enough, all the physicists there at my small school, there was a very restricted school, and even to enter there, you already enter with a scholarship, so it has to be well chosen. But everybody was a theoretical physicist with some interest in spiritism and consciousness and phenomena, and it's like that, And I try to tell in the book as much as possible, joining my growing up in that way, both to the cultural background where I was born, and then growing up in Brasilia, which is a modern town, then going to São Paulo and encountering a group of physicists who also like the idea of studying and learning about those things. Usually physicists are not religious, and when they have an interest in spiritism, it's not like religion, but the phenomenon of spiritism, spirit communication and interaction and stuff like that. And then later, when I finally finished my doctoral and came to the United States, that's when I got with the Lucid Dreaming. But of course, before then, while I was doing my doctoral, I got interaction with this lady about the out-of-body experiences. And that's when I discovered that my sleep paralysis trouble earlier in life and certain odd oddities, they all related to the out-of-body experience. And out-of-body experience were, again, too similar to lucid dreaming. And I don't know if you remember, in the 90s was a big argument about the difference between one and another, which end up not having much at all. It's all part of one enormous phenomenon of consciousness that we still have to learn about. So, thank you. I'll be helping me a little bit here.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah, because it was fascinating when in your book you discuss about your father and the way he was quite interested in theosophy and also the Rosicrucians as well, which
to Max Handel, not Theosophy. Theosophy I learned
No,
later.
what is it? AMORC. Are they the American group? It's Amor.
Mark, no, that it was the Rosicrucian. The Mark is a separate branch from Rosicrucian, or a completely different area. Maxwell Handel started a group in California, completely separate. And then later, I think to his wife, he became more religious. But the group in São Paulo actually reject the religiosity quite much. And they, even though they still keep Christianity, more like what I feel nowadays is kind of a guilty feeling that they have to include Christianity in the story so that they make it reliable. Perhaps as a way to attract more people.
Okay, so let's focus in on your sleep paralysis and how did that start? What was the? Can you give us a little bit of background as to how your experiences developed over the years in terms of sleep paralysis and then moving into lucid dreaming? Because that really is quite fascinating.
Well, the sleep paralysis started suddenly, out of the blue, after a bit of a nightmare where I had appeared a woman with a staring, look at me, and I ran away from her. That was too weird, even in a dream. Sorry. So I woke up and I couldn't move. That electrical sensation, you can't move, and it's scary. And I felt, as I have seen many seances or, sessions of spiritism where the medium, get the spirit, please with the bad ones, they shake and tremble. And I thought, oh no, I'm getting, a spirit is trying to get into me. And that scared me. I got up when I finally, took me off on that, and I finally woke up and I ran to my parents, knocked at the door and said, look, there's a spirit trying to get in me. And they were confused. Oh no, that's just a bad dream, just go back to sleep. But it wasn't easy. Every time I tried to fall asleep, it started over again. And I got scared. It took quite a long time before I finally fell asleep without feeling the vibration and those electrical-like sensations that sleep paralysis bring about. So, and that was about it. I never had it again, except some oddities and dreams where I was in the equivalent of high school there. But after I entered university, because it was far from my parents' home, it took quite a long time, and I would get home tired and couldn't, manage to pay attention in my studies. So I'll go sleep and get up early at about 3 or 4 o'clock and start studying until I finish. And then sometimes I finish early, go back to bed and take a little nap. Well, hell, that's when the trouble started again. And of course, I knew nothing about this thing. And oh, hell, there I go again, all those electric sensations. But, it saved me that I didn't have any other visual that people frequently have or seeing the low-level spirits.
Mm.
And it was more like my brother's trouble with the perfume thrower that they used to have this in the Brazilian Carnival. And, as recently as a couple of years ago, he told me the story of the spirit. He was sniffing there to feel the high. Then came that horde of spirits out, trying to suck the energy of this haziness from him. And he said he stopped because, every time he took it, he would see all those people trying to get the thing from him. Oddities like that. And it's funny that a physicist had to talk like that. But that's a fact. It's a story. It's my brother, what he says. And he's not religious or anything. He's a computer specialist. So when he tells the story, I believe him. And the first time he told me, actually, he only said, oh, I seem to feel, when I put the perfume, I felt like going backwards out of my body. And I said, oh, really? And so it was only recently he told me the whole story of all the spirits and trying to suck a thing out of him. Weird, I know, but that's how he tells the story. So I told him in the book at a certain point, I don't know if the version that you got, because I added that later. It
Yeah,
was,
I think so. You touched upon it, I think, but only touched
yeah.
upon it in passing. Because to me, the whole thing here of experience and hallucinations is something that we really are not approaching in the right way. I don't know if you've read any of my work, but in my latest book, Opening the Doors of Perception, I discuss in great detail when we talk about somebody having an hallucination, what are we really talking about here? You know, what is an hallucination? It is effectively the technical definition will be you are seeing something that is not in the external world that you're not sharing with somebody else. But of course, we all have an inner life that we don't share with other people anyway. And everything we perceive is actually given to us by our senses. And therefore, our senses can modulate whatever external reality is in a way internally to create this kind of internal scenario of what reality is. Now, to me, I've been long intrigued by something you touched upon before, which is, and in my book, The Out-of-Body Experience, a lot of people criticize me because I very much took a very, very skeptical approach to the out-of-body experience and arguing that, you know, it's an internal intrasomatic experience that is taking place within the mind rather than outside in external reality. But clearly there is more to it than that. And then we have this kind of continuum between lucid dreaming moving into out-of-the-body experiences, which has never really been clarified to me as to how they overlap and everything else. So what is your opinion of the overlap between lucid dreams and out-of-body experiences? How do you define them as being different or the same?
Well, to begin, I think I would like to, I was very, very puzzled when Thomas Campbell mentioned that he had abandoned the way everybody does lucid dreaming because you tend to have your mind fuzzy, which is true. It's very hard to keep awareness, which is the same problem in lucid dreaming. You have to pay attention, you have to, you know, really be into it so you don't lose it and get to that automatic part that's the mindless dreaming. But, and then I thought, wait a moment, you said you don't do out-of-body experience anymore? No, because I can do that, you know, even while I talk with you. And, you know, Thomas Campbell is a physicist. He worked with Robert Monroe. And he has now a different way than even Robert Monroe did. Well, so, you know, that is one point. We don't have all the information that we need to know. Lucid dreaming, out-of-body experience, and that's in between that we can develop without needing to, you know, get to that threshold of sleep, going out of the body, or, you know, get into the dream, you know, build that trick of getting, you know, recognizing dreaming and make you awake, and then the experience is about the same. Or you break down the imagery and like Jürgen Ziewer, you know, his famous so neat experience, enter in sort of another world. So we just don't know enough to even label it. And label is a dangerous thing to do because it separates the whole thing. You know, even doctors get confused with all those labels and stuff. Same here, a phenomena is so composite in several different ways that we cannot say for sure what is lucid dreaming, what is out-of-body experience, and what is the experience like Tom Campbell did, or that guy from Cyprus, where actually Andrea Mavromas got him.
Daskalos. Yeah.
And Daskalos, and he did the same. And he did both. He did everything, mediumship and out-of-body experiences and contact with the other world while still, you know, being conscious, awake. So we need to learn about that. We need to map out all the possible experiences. And that's one of my arguments there is that don't try to put interpretation to physics. Start to study the phenomenon. Don't use a statistical when you still don't even know what to count the frequency of whatever you are trying to investigate. You need to hear the stories, map out what all the variations of the phenomenon, then you can do something about it, you know, count the frequency, lucid dreaming type thing, out-of-body experience type, or, you know, traveling while you are still conscious in your body. It's interesting. I think it's so fascinating that it has this big variation. We just need to know more so we can determine why happen those variations and when, and the causes that takes to one way as compared to the other. And we write about our stories, but I think we have to restrict to our stories and not make any interpretations per se. But
I think they're very wise words, because the issue is really, as you quite rightly say, it's a phenomenon that we are not even beginning to understand. It's something that we experience, but it's not necessarily something that we can understand, and trying to put labels onto it. And there is a danger, and I know that very much, when you've emailed me about my trying to place the physics in some kind of a way, but I'm in total agreement with you. If you read some of my later work, I'm moving into a very different direction here. And to me, it is something that is so common. I mean, when I do my lectures and talks, it could be argued that the audience is self-selective. So therefore, people are going to be interested in deja vu sensations, out of the body experiences, because they're coming to see me talk. But nevertheless, the type of stories they tell seem to be very, very similar. Alarmingly similar. And I know from, Jürgen Ziever and I have met up many, many times to discuss these things, and I've discussed them with Tom Campbell and various other people. So there seems to be a phenomenon that we need to appreciate and understand. We can't, as I said before, we can't just claim that they're hallucinations. I mean, many of us have hypnagogic experiences. Hypnagogia must fit in here somewhere as well. There is a whole spectrum of experiences. Now, in your home country, we have people who experience ayahuasca, people who, the work of Valdo Vieira, who I know you mention as well, and I've interviewed people from the International Association of Consciousness, and it's almost a terra incognita. It's an area that we all experience, and we're all trying to map in an understanding way. And I think that's why your work excites me so much, because you're moving into this from very much the view of a theoretical physicist, but you're keeping your mind completely open as to what is actually taking place. So
I studied, right? I even went to neuroscience, not neurology, neuroscience. It was cognitive neuroscience, which is more, and it's funny. One funny situation in the cognitive neuroscience experience, the beginning in San Antonio, was that one day I asked, do you know about lucid dreaming? And everybody stopped and looked at me. What? Why, are you aware that we can become conscious within lucid dreaming? They never talked about this, and it's a phenomenon.
really, what year was that? This is around 2006 you were doing this?
It was about 1992.
Really?
Probably the second semester, because we had the first semester in cognitive neuroscience that included the medical students and the graduate students, but then it would go, everybody, students and specialists and curious people would get there. It was an interesting conversation, round table-like conversation. We had articles, and then I put on the table that question. The professor, my God, I forgot his name now. He died not too long ago. And he remembers so well. And then one day I suggested to bring him for a talk, and he had already retired. He expanded his interest even to hypnotism, which I was surprised. And during the talk, he remembered my question about lucid dreaming as part of consciousness experience, that it being ignored. So you see, and my attempt, going back to the line of thought, my attempt to get into neuroscience and cognition and all that was to learn another phase of knowledge, or human knowledge, that understands the brain. I thought maybe I could have something about, nowadays we call consciousness or the mind, that could explain some of the phenomena I was having, including Kundalini-like experience that I had here. I had no idea what Kundalini was. A big flash of light right here in the center of my head. It blew me away. I didn't know what that, and I spent some time searching for that. And that is not within the consciousness experience that people talk about, unless you are into yoga, unless you practice meditation. And I didn't, I wasn't into yoga. I was too busy get into my life, as a physicist to do that.
And
So,
isn't that the absolute proof of the pudding, though, as we say in the UK, in that you were describing here a Kundalini experience that you would not have known about. So it's not as if you've read about it. You are describing the pituitary pineal breaking out and the light experience that you couldn't have known about. And this is the thing that intrigues me. How can we not say that these experiences are in some way objectively real when people consistently describe them without being led to them? So what happened when you actually then discussed it with your neurological group? You brought up the subject. Did they then continue and run with that? Did they pick up on it and discuss it in future years, or did it just die again?
no, they didn't. It went dead because there was nothing related to what we were talking about. It's just that I brought up a different kind of consciousness experience that was never discussed.
Mm.
So whatever famous authors we were reviewing, articles and books, and there was nothing about this experience. And, it's very common in the 19th century explorer talk about out-of-body experience. So that's a consciousness experience. We can define it as such. It's not an illusion. It's a real thing. So,
Well, isn't it? We're coming down here to the problem of materialist reductionism and the idea of materialist reductionism, and that effectively you can take things apart and you can explain them by taking them apart, but there is nothing other than physical reality. And it's only physical reality. And I know that people like eliminative reductionists, such as Daniel Dennett and the Churchlands, will argue there isn't even an inner life. We are fooling ourselves into even thinking we are consciously aware. I mean, I'd love to know who Daniel Dennett thinks writes his books for him. I've no idea, because clearly he's put himself into a total impasse here. We all know, as experiences of our own conscious experience, we know that there is something in here. I mean, I've argued many, many times, neurologically, where does consciousness come from? The hard problem of consciousness. Where does it come from? Is it just the addition of one more chemical in the brain? Is it the addition of one more molecule? Is it the addition of a certain mixture of neurotransmitters in the brain? That suddenly this completely non-physical, non-three-dimensional, with no rex extens, no extension in space, suddenly appears out of what is effectively inanimate matter, which is you and I and our inner life. And we are perceivers of an external reality, and we inwardly generate that reality. Now, to me, this is the most important thing. Now, I don't know if you've come across, but I'm working closely with two Austrian researchers. One's a consultant neurologist and one is a consultant psychologist. And they have something called the hypnagogic light device. And if you've heard about it,
I tried that.
You have tried it. Tell me, how did you find it? Okay, tell me more. Tell me more about your experience with that then.
Oh, no, but the only thing I noticed that there's one point that it breaks through hypnagogic-like imaging, it transforms. And when I told the guy about it, I said, oh, that's exactly the point where I started seeing things through the light. I said, so I know about it. Frequently in the hypnagogic threshold, the sleep, those images transform, they change, feel like this and then they change. And that's just one part of it, this change of image, the sound to change. And then there are the other kind of physical or non-physical type of experience that we have, like going back to the body and feel like expand and then contract and all of this, that fluffy thing contracting, and whoop, then okay, I'm back.
Yes.
That's part of consciousness experience, and it needs to be taken seriously. And the light experience, they are producing similar things. They need to be considered seriously, not only as a entertainment thing. It seems the guy here has a double standard of entertaining, and okay, that is serious matter. And I don't like that. And of course, a lot of people, that's how they make money. The guy was making money exactly like that. But if we know to learn the thing, it needs to take to a different standard, that entertainment part becomes sideways and then we experiment seriously. I don't know how these Swiss guys, right? I think Yeah, and then they should probably do that rather than just sell the machine.
They are. They've there's going to be a paper
I don't
coming
know
out.
much about them, so
Okay. There's going to be a paper coming out later on this year from the University of Sussex, which is local to me, and they've been working. The researchers there have been working using the hypnagogic-like device, the Lucia. And I am informed that this paper is really going to shake a lot of trees, because it really is doing the arguments of exactly what the hypnagogic experience is doing, and indeed trying to explain how the brain neurologically can create hypnagogic imagery and exactly what is going on. Now, as an opportunity here, I mean, I can talk, but it's not me that needs to be talking here, it's you, in terms of your interpretation of hypnagogia. There will be people out there who will not have known of the term, the technical term of hypnagogia and hypnopompia. So could you explain a little bit about what it is and what takes place in hypnagogic and hypnopompia?
Hypnagogia was Andreas Mavromati's suggestion that we put together one label only for the experience of entering this dreamlike experience while falling asleep, which is called hypnagogic, as opposed to the one where you are awake, and that's called hypnopompic. So hypnagogia would be the experience that is not just imagery, it has tactile, it has sound, and and dreamlike imagery that's very common. But that's what it is. It's simple as that. If you pay attention while you're falling asleep, principally if it's in the morning where you have gone out to your sleep cycles, you start seeing that. And of course, that's good for creativity, which my husband discovered recently. I said, yeah, I know. And but most importantly, at least for people like me, is for the experience of seeing that, the experience of consciousness doing that. And of course, the opportunity to go out of body and experience that different type that looks like out of body. If it is or not, we can't confirm, and actually we can confirm what was a claim that many times people promoted as you can't confirm, go out of the house and see that. Not so. Sometimes you get there and hell, it's completely different.
Yeah.
The formations and situations. And I have a friend who said he would go there to the park and sit there, okay, I'm out of body in my town. Suddenly, out of the blue, there comes a ship sailing the main street. It got a shock so deeply he didn't want to do that for a month or so. He was mad at that because he believed that he was in the real world. It wasn't. Somebody played a trick on him, playing a little game on him.
This is the thing, isn't it? That have you read any work by Robert Wagner at all?
Yes.
Okay. And again, Robert argues this, that there's this kind of overlap world. And somebody we touched upon earlier on, I wrote a book on the out-of-body experience. One of the themes I discussed was, I had a chapter on Valdo Vieira. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that Valdo did, he went to visit his sister's house in a place you mentioned, is it Minas Gerais? I'm never, my Portuguese isn't that good, but he traveled from Sao Paulo, I think, to his sister's house. And when he was there were things that were right and there were things that were wrong. So there were certain elements of what he'd seen in his out-of-body experience that was absolutely correct, but others that weren't. And this intrigues me, because if you read Robert Monroe's work as well, and particularly the work Robert Monroe did with Charles Tart, whereby, again, there seems to be this kind of bit of central consistency, which is like part of consensual reality. But there are these kind of jokey things that happen. And as Robert Wagner says, he said, who is the bricoleur? Who is the person that is creating these scenarios? For instance, the first time I had a hypnopompic experience, I was at work. And I was working in front of my computer. And then suddenly I wasn't. And I was looking down from a level about 12 foot in the air at an old man reading a newspaper. And I was looking down at him. And then I heard the sound of a siren. And I looked up, and I was in this huge square. And I think it was somewhere in Latin America. And there was an ambulance going around the square. But as with hypnopompic imagery, isn't it? When you look at it and you think, oh, what's that? As soon as you get your attention to it, you lose it. It goes. It's as if you have to kind of have it creep up on you, and you fool yourself, and it gets drawn in.
Yeah.
Now,
is that you have to change, your attention all the time, but still it never escapes the transformation of the environment.
Mm. You give some very good advice in your book as to how to hold on to these things. And I know there'll be so many people out there that'll be interested in what your advice is. What techniques can you use to really develop these things and hold them in your consciousness and not lose them? Because I never can hold them. I lose them all the time.
I lose it too. That's normal. That's why Thomas Campbell say, well, this one, when I'm awake, I can control. I don't have the fuzzy mind problem, which is a sort of a fuzzy mind, really, because your level of consciousness varies so much more than when we are here awake. Though we do, right? We get into the robot type that, what's his name, writer, famous British writer talk about, Gary, what's that, Lachman?
Gary Lachman, yes.
Yeah, he talks about that a lot, the robot. He wrote a book with the symbol. We get into the robot so much that the reality kind of becomes fuzzy too. And to keep awareness even while we're awake is not easy. We get lazy, we get tired, and we slip into the automatic. And, all these are variations of phenomenal consciousness. And now, even that part, I have seen the normal neuroscience and cognition talking about. They talk a lot of interesting stuff, for sure. People are serious about it, but they miss those details. How can they miss it? A musician would know about that very well, because they had to use this robotic part of our consciousness to play well. And they have to be trained, and they have to be trained perfectly. Hell, if you do it a mistake and you start doing wrong, it's going to be hard to fix it. Everybody knows. I used to be a musician when I was a kid, young lady, so I know the problem. And that's the same, speech is speaking when you learn a new language like me. If I get to some mistake, it goes to that part of automatic, that's robot-like, that we need to use so that we can rest in some way with our attention. But then in the state of out-of-body experience or lucid dream, that's a problem. It keeps slipping all the time, and we lose the awareness so easily. And that's annoying most of the time. At least I find it annoying, it's tiresome.
I know, and it's the same, isn't it, of when you're lucid dreaming. I've only managed ever once to become lucidly aware in a dream. And it was such a shock to me that I realized I was dreaming. I ceased dreaming and I woke up. But for a split second, I was there and I thought, no, this is a dream. And I thought, I've succeeded. I've managed to become lucid. And then I lost it again. And you wake up and you go, oh, dear, damn. I was so close there.
That has the same kind of thing. Then I lost it. Why?
Yeah, and it is why. We
are not sure what conditions allow you to have crispy kind of aware of that, which is possible. I know people who can do it, and Robert Wagner is one of those. And then two other people, that the common people that we get there and keep losing it, and it's annoying. And
it would be fascinating.
Learn about the thing straight and that's why I say read the stories, analyze them, how it gets there, how we learn to improve it, because some people experiment and improved it.
Yeah.
And then we are going to know more about our states of attention or consciousness, whatever you call it. And perhaps, then, okay, you get to the Thomas Campbell level, and you get to do it without having to fall asleep, which would be great.
Well, maybe you've hit the nail on the head there. I think, the central thing is possibly attention, because, of course, in psychology, we always talk about, what is attention and how you attend to one thing or another. But effectively, I've always found, and we've touched upon it, and obviously it was an experience your husband had recently, that it's when you go into that, when you're in the kind of openness to the creative somebody that's inside you, where suddenly the creativity happens. And I think your music analogy was a perfect one. It must be the case, that as soon as you think, if you're playing a violin, and it's suddenly when you attend to the fact you're doing it, you lose it. It's like driving, isn't it? If you suddenly think, I'm driving, oh, how did I just do that?
But
And
that's
it's
a different problem of consciousness. what we call the muse, the creativity thing. What I think I touched that too. And Wilson Van Dusen was one guy who wrote a book that called my attention to the fact. He says that we actually have that channel open all the time. We just don't pay attention. We don't notice. But creativity is flowing all the time. Is that subconscious or unconscious, like Jung used to call it? But it's there. And we can train ourselves to be more open to it. And we wish it would be more open with. And then the scaloscope that we can actually develop to be a super consciousness. And I think the possibility is amazing. I wish I could get to that. I don't even know if Dascalos was that level, though he had a lot of skills. And it's a pity everybody get old and die, right? We cannot keep them to teach us.
I know.
Gone. Unfortunately, he's gone. But after him, it just continues what he had done. They don't have the same ability that he has.
Well, I think it's so important, isn't it, that we do that? I mean, I don't know if you've read my latest book, Opening the Doors of Perception, because in this I take Aldous Huxley's 1954 book, Opening the Doors of Perception, and I expand it, taking into account modern neurology and modern understanding of the mind-brain interface, and I come up with something I call the Huxleyan spectrum, which is the idea that the doors of perception become more and more open as certain neurological channels develop. And I genuinely believe, I think it could be something to do with endogenous dimethyltryptamine. And I think that there is sufficient evidence to say that the brain or the pineal gland actually releases under certain or synthesizes from melatonin what one of my fellow writers calls metatonin, which is endogenous DMT. And when the DMT is within the neurological pathways, I mean, I don't know if you come across the trace amine associated receptors in the brain that seem to be designed to work with dimethyltryptamine. So they've already discovered the receptor sites. But of course, it is only recently, with the work of a lady called Jimo Borjigin at the University of Michigan, and she's actually discovered in the brains of the pineal gland of live rats, they actually discovered dimethyltryptamine for the first time in the mammalian brain. So now we do have direct evidence that dimethyltryptamine is a neurotransmitter. So if we take and extrapolate from that, as Rick Strassman says, is DMT actually our reality modulator? And is it this which we need to attune into in some way? And this is where people like yourself is so important in the work you're trying to do, because we need to take this forward. There's a lot of inertia, and there's also an awful lot of charlatans out there. There's an awful lot of people who are making a lot of money out of total nonsense. I think your point is an excellent one, that we need to look at the experiential, to say to people, why did it happen then? What is it, those moments? And I think your work is very important in terms of that. So where are you planning to take your work? Have you got any plans for more books, or what are you planning to do now with your work?
No, I have no plans for more books. I think that's my experience, and that's it. Tomorrow I'll be 67, so hey, I'm at the end of life, or almost. So no, it's more of a sharing of my experience. So I finally got this book out there through my own efforts. I detested the idea of getting an agent in all that confusion, being denied or rejected. I hate rejection. It's tough to deal with that, especially if you're not known. Never mind your background, they don't pay attention to it. It's a person who has no idea what you do. No, I think this book is about my experience. I wanted to share it. And I went back to physics, to my unified field theory. I want to at least do something more before I get too old. And then enjoy the rest, if I have good health, I enjoy the rest of life, but no becoming famous or planning new books or anything. I may write an article or two. I have some ideas I'd like to explore, but not in a book, no.
Okay,
so too much work, and it's the making of the book that's complicated. So
in terms then, I'm interested, because it's very unusual to actually get a theoretical physicist that I can actually talk to like this. So where do you think theoretical physics is going now? Because we seem to be at some kind of, I feel that theoretical physics in many ways is almost like, it's become almost like, you know, the epicycles that were created to actually explain retrograde motion in the outer planets. And I sometimes feel that theoretical physics, we have this huge mismatch between relativity and quantum physics, and the way if you plug in the maths in quantum physics, you get infinities. So where do you think we are going now in terms of our understanding of the ultimate nature of reality? I know it's a massive question, but I'm just really interested to know from your point of view.
Yeah. You know, as a physicist, we sometimes get lost in math as a theoretical physicist. Of course, the experiments has the trouble to translate that into possible experiment. And I am surprised that we are so wildly successful. You know, it's a lot of money, a lot of trouble, and they do get to something. The discovery of the Higgs boson, it's tremendous success. And now it starts with physics. And my work makes the geometry, that's the Einstein idea that he put into general relativity, and to try to put together gravity, electromagnetism, and all the other fields that apply to particle physics. And in my case, I use what they call Young-Mills fields that translate to the nucleus or electron or weaken the strong force and so on. But if I get an article that a theoretical particle physicist write, I have trouble writing. They use a lot of group theory, which I'm not very acquainted with, just barely necessary for, you know, doing what I do. And it seems to me they get into a lot of conjecture, new theories, explain this, explain that. And what Einstein did in trying to unify is more interesting, at least from my point of view. And of course, it's not to throw away all the work of other people, but we can get to the particles through those fields, the study of fields. Doing geometrically like I'm doing, it's not just space-time, the way Einstein did. When you get to electromagnetism and other fields, you kind of join the geometry with what we call internal geometry. It's a mathematical geometry, but you work it together. And there you see different effects and interaction and so on. But it's not an easy going. I haven't published many papers because first, it's difficult to find somebody to understand it. And second, it's difficult to find something that I can trust. I don't want to go wild in conjectures. I want to go this. And I'm pretty strict on that. I like to get to results and then say that it may have some interpretation here and there. And I have seen a lot of wild conjectures because I was at Fermilab near Chicago, that works with the University of Chicago. And cosmologists, in my opinion, go too wild. You know, and there's a funny story with Michael Turner. He had the inflation universe. He worked a lot of that. And then I read in his article, and then I get to the point where the universe was just a 10-centimeter ball. And then I got to him to discuss. Then I said, but Mike, 10 centimeters? The whole universe? He very said, well, that's what the theory tells. And it's true. That's what the theory.
Well, this is, isn't it?
Then we stop. Okay, that's what the theory tells.
Because one of the things I've never understood, well, I understand how Murray Gell-Mann came up with this idea of hyperinflation in the first billionth of a second in order to accommodate the fact the way the universe is in terms of size. But there is still this huge mystery because it's almost like, do you know, in English you have these things, Rudyard Kipling had these things called just so stories, how the elephant got its trunk and things. And it almost seems as if a lot of the physics we're using now in terms of cosmology, in terms of the Big Bang, is we are coming up with stories to accommodate the things we see or affect. Like renormalization is something I've tried to understand how renormalization, it seems to me as if it's kind of, we're getting quite technical here, I know, I'm sorry for everybody listening in here, but renormalization just seems to be, you plug the numbers in and you get the answers you want because that's the answers you want. And we're not really going back to the brass tacks. I mean, did you come across the work when you were doing the studies of Einstein and everybody else, the work of people like David Bohm?
Oh.
David Bohm, Bohm.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I haven't gone into his work. I know him about, his things, but I never studied. It's kind of too off my area. So
okay, because it's quite interesting because
it's worthless to read those. You get it kind of, in the clouds.
Yes.
a little bit, but not fully. And you have so many specializations that sometimes you can't communicate very well. You have to be in all the areas, which is impossible. After a while, you have to restrict yourself to one definite area. Yeah, but I understand the point. A lot of the theory, the inflationary universe that Michael Turner worked a lot on that is the same. And another theory, now we have, the dark energy is trying to explain, the continual expansion, accelerating of expansion of the universe. And these are new things. And the funny thing is, in 1995, I stopped doing physics, trying to find a job to help my husband with, expenses and bills and such. And I disconnect from the Relativity Group until about 2005. And then when I came back, I looked, what? Dark energy? I was shocked. There wasn't anything, and they were working with collision of black holes at that time in my group, which of course I never worked with that, but that's what they do there. That's one big thing that they do here at University of Texas Austin. But, and I said, wow, they got some really wild stuff. Now it's not just dark matter, but also dark energy. So that's what I mean. Sometimes they get surprises. They can't explain the whole thing. They have to create new theories. So don't get too much in quantum physics, and because there's a dark energy thing and there's the other one. And there's the number of particles. So, it's better to keep it aside and, look at the fashionable quantum physics explaining consciousness with a touch of salt, a grain of salt. It will help to be objective. And not to be so embarrassed when later in the future they come with a completely different explanation also. It can happen. We have had that.
Totally. I mean, total paradigm change, effectively, 1900 and Max Planck, and it suddenly, everything changes. And you also wonder whether the kind of work we are interested in terms of the consciousness reality interface, I think is where the roots of the next paradigm will be. And probably we're going to be so totally surprised, or probably not. We're probably going to go, it was so obvious that we couldn't see it. Again, the idea, and I know that the areas you want to move into are these areas. And just for the final section, it was something, in your recent email you sent to me, is the level of skepticism that is out there in terms of a lot of the experiences people have. Do you have any way of us being able to break down that skepticism? What approach can we take to get the people? Because my wife is the same. My wife just doesn't get it. What do we need to do?
Well, there was a question of my husband. Well, don't you believe the stories people tell you? Don't you call them liars? That's not okay. They are not telling an illusion or something absurd. They're telling the personal experience, and we should pay attention, take notes, and accumulate. That's why qualitative research methods are so important here. And that's funny because the Moral Institute now has some psychologists there who is also advocating the same thing. And first time I heard about it in mid-90s, I was at education psychology, studying new advanced statistics that I had to use in neuroscience when I was working there. And I thought, that's it, that's the way to deal with the subjective experiences that people have. Take notes and start comparing one with the other, and then, making a catalog of different experiences. That's the first thing. And then, of course, look at neuroscience if there's anything to do with it. Look at what the thing in the brain that produces those exceptional experiences, like ayahuasca. So you're going to build a huge panorama, and then you're going to make connections, relationships and correlationships, whatever you call that. And then after that, is that where you're going to do the link? And you see that some stories are not just a wacky thing to say, but a crazy guy telling weird stories, but something that's possible in consciousness experience. I think that's important. If we don't do that, we are going to, the skeptic is as valid as the believer in this case, and I think we should be in the middle term. Be skeptic to a point and believe it, listen to the stories with respect and save it and compare to all other stories that people tell before getting to a conclusion that is good or bad or doesn't exist or exist. It's things like that. Be neutral. We have the right to be neutral and, be open-minded, not to be full believer, crazy believer, religious.
That's the idea, isn't it? You keep it, as the old statement goes, keep an open mind, but not so much that your brain falls out.
Yeah.
And it's also
or
to
be a believer like going to the church that I have seen many in Brazil. That's all they believe and that's it. That you go to hell or go to heaven. If you're not in the group, you go to hell. Well, it's not. That's not possible. Otherwise, it would be a wasteful universe, and I don't think it is.
Well, the thing is, isn't it, Sirley, the idea, we bandy around this term empirical evidence, but of course the word empirical is from Latin, from experience. Yeah. So therefore, we have to, even scientists, when they are doing experiments, are still involved in the experiments, and they are interpreting using their experience to define things. Now, if somebody has an extraordinary experience, it is bad science, in my opinion, to just turn around and say, you've hallucinated, or you're lying, or you're exaggerating.
Yeah, these are extremists, and I'm exactly advocating the midway, right? Like the Chinese philosopher said, midway is the best. You go to one side, you go to the other side. You don't just believe in everything, you just don't reject everything. But be a cool organizer of the stories. Then you start seeing relationships, you start seeing groups of experiences. And, as I said, don't label like lucid dreaming out-of-body experience, because it's going to be a big argument with no end, and we didn't resolve anything. It's still a mixed up experience to this day.
Wonderfully said. That was really good. That was really excellent. And a perfect way to get towards the end of the interview. Now, how do the listeners or the viewers get hold of your book? Can you give them some information as to how they can find it? Because I'm sure there'll be a great deal of interest. And guys, this is a great book. It really is. So,
yeah, I published to the Amazon, so they can get either Kindle or the print book. Amazon.com. Where you get everything now, but. Books, that's what it was published. Great Space published the print on demand. So you can always get the print copy and the Kindle copy. I don't sell in libraries. I know if they send it to libraries. My voice is breaking today.
It's all right.
If they send it to libraries, it will be, independent from the libraries. That is just an online kind of sale.
Good.
And I haven't started promoting it today, which this interview is my first official promotion of the book. I haven't, and I told you I'm moving and starting a new life. I have done a lot of work. Even my physics is going slow like lately. Hopefully we start moving again in the right direction.
Excellent. That's wonderful. Well, thank you very much. You've been everything I expected of the interview. It's gone extremely well. I can't speak from your opinion, but I've really enjoyed it. And I just feel that we've scratched the surface, and you and I probably need to have another Skype chat just together to talk through certain other themes that we touched upon as well.
Yeah, that would be interesting. And I thank you for giving me this opportunity. I think that's important.
No, it's been wonderful. It's been wonderful. And as always, thanks to dear Nunez back there in Denver for organising all this, because without the wonderful dear, we wouldn't be able to do this. So again, thank you very much, Sirley, for a wonderful discussion. And hopefully we'll be speaking again to you soon. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.